Hello, my name is Anniken and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to talk about travel knitting and I'm going to share my top tips for taking your knitting with you when you are traveling. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and please consider subscribing if you haven't already, and do leave a comment with your thoughts on what I'm talking about today. If you have any advice to share or if you've got a trip planned in the near future, tell me where you're going and what knitting you're taking with you and why you've chosen that project or that type of knitting to take with you. At the moment it is June 2021. So at the moment, obviously, travel is still quite difficult for a lot of people, especially traveling abroad might be difficult at the moment. And a lot of people are not comfortable flying at the moment, which I quite understand. You may be planning a trip closer to home, or you might be jetting off abroad to visit family or to go on holiday. Or you may have some local trips planned instead. Whatever plans you have for this summer, there will come a time in the future where we will be getting back to normal, I hope, and doing a bit more traveling. So in this video I'm going to share my top travel tips for taking your knitting on a holiday with you. I'll share the favorite types of projects that I like to take with me, how to make the most of the knitting you do take with you, and also I'm going to talk about knitting and airplanes. First I'll talk about what kind of projects are best for holidays. And then we'll talk about knitting and airplanes a bit later on. So if you're driving on holiday and luggage is not a space, or if you're flying, going by train or whatever, and luggage is not a space, then taking a big sweater to knit may not be a problem. But if you're flying, you'll be restricted to your luggage allowance. If you're going by train or coach, you may be restricted to how much you can carry. If you're going in the car, you may be restricted by the size of your car or the number of people who are going in your car and what they're taking as well. So depending on how much luggage you have with you will help you decide how much knitting you can take and what else you're willing to compromise on. Many people fly with just their hand luggage these days because checking in a case on the plane these days is a lot more expensive than it used to be. And they're worried about whether or not they'll be able to take their knitting on board the plane. So I will talk quite a lot about that later on because I always take knitting on planes with me. So my favourite projects to take on holiday with me are socks, small shawls knitted in sock weight or lace weight yarn. You can take other small projects as well. I tend to mainly take socks and shawls. Sometimes I might take mittens. Other small projects are things like hats, cowls, anything small. They'll fit in a fairly small project bag. The other thing you want to think about is the weight of yarn you are taking. So if you're taking something that's knitted in chunky yarn, you're going to knit it up fairly quickly. It's not going to take you long to knit a hat made of chunky yarn. You may knit it in an evening or two. Last time I knitted a chunky hat, I did knit it in an evening. It didn't take that many hours. So for a holiday where I may be knitting several hours every day, that wouldn't last me very long at all. And it takes up a lot of space in my suitcase unless I'm going to actually wear it on the holiday. So I do think it's a good idea to think about the thickness of yarn. If you take thinner yarn, it will last you a lot longer. It'll take up less space in your suitcase and it'll also last you a lot longer. So for example, a lace-weight shawl made from lace-weight yarn, so say about 800 meters or more per 100 grams. That can be enough knitting for a lot of knitters for 2 weeks. So do consider projects with thinner yarn rather than thicker yarn because it will take you a lot. It's much better value for money knitting. You tend to pay less per meter for the yarn, and it will take you much longer to knit up that one project, and it'll take a lot less space in your suitcase. If you don't want to knit a lace shawl, then look at other small projects that you can take instead. And if lace weight yarn is too fine for you, then do consider sock weight yarn or 4-ply yarn, fingering weight yarn. They are good options instead of lace weight yarn. Make sure you know how challenging you want your knitting to be. You may just want something easy, garter stitch, stocking stitch, something you can just chill, relax, not think about, no worry about making mistakes. Or you may want something more challenging. It just depends on the type of holiday you're going on, what you're going to be doing when you're knitting, how much time you'll have to knit every day, all those kind of things. If you're planning to take your knitting out and about with you, and you'll be perhaps going out for drinks in the evening, and you'll be sitting in a busy bar or a coffee shop or restaurant with your knitting, you may want something fairly easy. Whereas if you're sitting in a lounge or on the balcony, for example, when we go to Spain, I like to sit on the balcony and knit every evening. We don't go out a lot in the evenings, and I just like to sit on the balcony and knit, and that's very relaxing. And there isn't anything really to distract me. I just sit there and kind of people watch a bit, watch people come and go. But I can cope with something a little bit more challenging when I'm sitting there knitting. Whereas if I was going out with a group of friends for drinks or something, I would want something a lot easier. So it's important to think about how much knitting time you have available, and also what type of knitting time that is. Do you want to take something challenging? Do you want to learn a new technique? Will you have time to focus on that technique? Or is it better to stay with something that you already know? You really do need to think about the difficulty level of the project you want to take. I tend to, if I have enough space in my suitcase, I tend to quite often take one easy project and one slightly more challenging project, so I can change between the two. You also need to think about where you're holidaying. If you are going somewhere hot or you're going somewhere cool, if you are going to Southern Europe in the summer, and you're going to be knitting a 35-degree heat, you do not want to be knitting an Aran weight jumper. Something small and light in a lighter yarn is going to be much more comfortable in those kind of heats. If you're going somewhere cool, then that Aran weight sweater might work out if you have room in your suitcase. I love knitting socks on the beach, and as you can see from my podcast videos, I do sometimes take a sock project with me on the moors as well, and knit socks on the moors. I do find socks really good for portable easy projects. Sometimes if I fancy a new hat, I might take a hat, but we do holiday in Spain regularly, and I always knit 2, maybe 3 pairs of socks in a 2 or 3 week holiday while we're away, and I tend to do most of the sock knitting on the beach. I have gotten a few funny looks when I've been sitting on the beach in 35-degree heat in my swimsuit knitting on socks. On several occasions I've had Spanish ladies stop and talk to me. If you go to the beach, I'm sure this happens elsewhere as well, but it definitely happens in Spain. You're sitting on the beach, we like to sit quite close to the water if we can, and there's always people walking up and down the beach, quite often in groups, chatting. And it's happened quite a few times now where a group of Spanish ladies, 2 or 3 Spanish ladies, have been walking up and down chatting, and they stop and they look at my knitting and they start talking to me. And I don't speak Spanish, although I am learning. So I tend to just like hand them my socks so they can look at it, and then point to my feet, and then they tend to like look at them, chat amongst themselves, laugh, give them back to me and smile and walk on their merry way. And I assume they're probably thinking, what's this crazy woman doing knitting socks in this heat, especially woolly socks. But I do have really cold feet, and I even wear woolly socks at night when we go to Spain because my feet get really cold and then I get cramps. So I wear socks, woolly socks in bed every night of the year, no matter where I am, because my feet get cold and I get cramp, and it's not much fun. So a little bit of a secret there. So a lot of us have probably been wondering if you can take knitting on a plane. I got back into knitting about, I guess it's probably about 16, 17 years ago. And the first couple of holidays after I got back into knitting, the first couple of foreign holidays where I was on the plane, I didn't take knitting with me. And then we had one holiday in Spain where we went to a big department store, and I was really missing knitting because I hadn't taken anything with me. So I bought some needles and some cheap yarn because that's all they had, and I can't remember what I knitted. I don't think I ever finished it, but I cast something on just so I could be knitting. And then when we came to fly home, I wanted to take that so I could actually knit on the plane, because I thought, well, sitting at the airport and sitting on the plane can get so boring. So I decided I would take my knitting with me on the plane when we flew back from Spain. And I did actually, I bought some bamboo needles, and we got to the airport, and I did actually ask when we checked in our luggage if I could take my knitting on the plane with me. And they said, oh, what's your knitting needles? So I showed them, and they went, oh yeah, that's fine. And they were circular bamboo ones. And that was the first time I took the knitting on the plane with me. That was also the last time I asked if it was okay to take knitting on the plane with me. So at the moment, it does actually say on the UK government website, and I'll put the link to that page below. There is a list of what you're allowed to take in your hold luggage and in your hand luggage, and knitting needles are listed as allowed in UK airports. But I have heard of people who have had their knitting needles confiscated, mainly from foreign airports. I think I've heard 2 or 3 that have had problems with Greek airports. So I don't know, everyone's got different experiences. I have flown over the last 15 years, I've flown to and from airports in the UK, several airports in the UK, Jersey, Budapest, several airports in Spain, Norway, several airports in Norway, Italy, we flew in and out of Venice. Where else have I taken knitting? That's probably it. So Norway, Spain, Hungary, Italy, the UK. I think that's it. And I've never had a problem. During the 15 years that I've been taking knitting with me on planes, I've several times been stopped in security where I've had knitting in my hand luggage bag, and I've had all my hand luggage checked on several occasions, and my knitting has never been a problem. When I flew back from Edinburgh once, I've been teaching at the Edinburgh Yarn Festival. I only took hand luggage with me, and I had to take some spare needles just in case any of the pupils in my classes, I was there to teach, so I had to take some spare needles just in case any of the students in my classes had forgotten to bring needles or had unsuitable needles. So I probably had like half a dozen at least pairs of knitting needles with me. There were circular ones, and they were the Nipro what are they called? The Nipro Carbons. That's it, the Nipro Carbons, because they're the ones I use for workshops. I may have had some straight Nipro Carbons as well, I can't remember, but probably just circular ones. And that was no problem at all. I also once, when I was searched at one of the bigger airports in London, I had 2 or 3 sock projects on double pointed needles. They were all kind of nearly finished. And the security officer looked in each bag, and when he got to the 3rd one, he just kind of laughed and made some comment about how much but I enjoyed knitting, that kind of thing. So I've never had a problem taking knitting with me on planes. The only time I've had problems was when I took some scissors that were too big. So you are allowed to take small scissors. I haven't checked what the length is, but it's the blade that they look on. If the blade, I think, is something like 4 or 5 centimeters. If the blade is shorter than that, then you shouldn't have a problem. I did have scissors confiscated once because they were in my project bag or my pencil case or something, and I forgot they were there. But that's the only time I've had a problem, and I was definitely in the wrong then, so that's fine. I do know some people who have contacted the airline they're flying with to ask if they're allowed to bring knitting on the plane with them. Thing is, the airline is not in control of what you're allowed to take through security. They don't start the security checkpoints. So even if the airline says you can take knitting, the security officer that you encounter on the day may not. If you're flying from the UK and you have the government website on your phone, you could say, well, it says here, but also be careful about arguing with security officers, because I would try and avoid arguing with them. If they say you can't take your knitting, I would say, well, I looked at the government website and it says here, can I show you? And if they say you're not allowed to take your knitting, ma'am, and you know they get a bit stroppy, I would just say, okay, take it, because I wouldn't want to be told I can't travel. So do be careful. I've seen people argue with security staff before, and they've been threatened with being taken off the plane and denied being able to fly. So I wouldn't argue with security if you want to be able to fly. Obviously, the airline may control what you do once you're on the plane, and the only time I've been told I can't knit on the plane was once when I was told I couldn't knit during takeoff or landing. Most of the time when I've been knitting on the plane, the staff have either just ignored me, or they've made comments or asked me what I'm knitting, or said, oh, I hope you're going to finish that before we land, and that just jokey comments. So I've never had a problem with being able to knit on the plane. I've also never had a problem being able to knit in the departure lounge or at the gate. So I will share some of my top tips for taking your knitting with you on the plane, or even some of these apply to even if you're not going on a plane. They're just good for if you're traveling with your knitting. So the first thing is, don't ask them if you're allowed, especially if you're going on a plane, don't ask if your knitting is allowed. Just leave your knitting in your bag with the rest of your stuff. Make sure in your hand luggage that anything like toiletries are in the little clear pouch that you have to put them in when you get to security. Take all your toiletries and liquids, makeup, all that kind of stuff out and put it in the tray, and take out all your electronics like your headphones, not headphones, your phone and your tablet. Make sure that if you got any jewellery that might set off the security x-ray thing, that you take that off. I wear these silver bangles and I know that they always set off the x-ray machine you walk through, so I always take those off when I go through security, and either I'll take them off before I get to security and put them in my handbag, or I'll take them off and just put them in the tray with my electronics and my toiletries and makeup and all that kind of stuff. So just make sure you follow all the rules, and that'll reduce the risk of them actually deciding to search your hand luggage. If you are worried about taking your needles, use wooden or bamboo needles. I used to always use wooden needles, but for quite a few years now, probably close to 10 years I would say, I've been traveling mainly with metal needles. I mostly use circular knitting for all my knitting, but I would never consider taking straight needles knitting with me. I would never consider taking straight needles on a plane with me now. I would always take circular needles, and even if I'm traveling by coach or by train or anything like that, or in the car, I would always take circular needles, because if you have the circular needles are attached, the two needle tips are attached to the cable. So if you are sitting on a plane or a train or a coach or the car and you drop one needle, you can't do that with circular needles because they're attached. So if I'm knitting with two separate needles and I drop one, I'm then going to be scrambling around on the floor to try and find it. If I have circular needles, they are going to stay attached. So you're not going to lose one of your needles while you're away. I like to use interchangeable needles so I can take the tip off. And what I would recommend is that when you're traveling, if you have interchangeable needles, and you can get them in metal ones, you can get them in wooden ones. These are Licker needles, they're wooden ones, and these are Chagu interchangeable ones. Nipro as well do a range of wooden, metal and carbon needles. Do take interchangeable needles because you can screw the tips off, and what I sometimes do, especially if I'm traveling with just hand luggage, is that I will screw the tips off. So I'll have my project on the cable, I'll push it into the center of the cable, I'll take my tips off and I'll put my knitting back in my project bag. Then I'll take my tips and I'll put them either in a pocket of my handbag or something like that, or in a small pencil case with a few pens. So if you've got your knitting needles in among some pens, security might not even notice that you're taking knitting needles. So that's a very good tip. If you like the long straight metal ones, they may be seen as a potential weapon more than circular ones. So if you're not used to knitting with circular ones, it might be worth practicing because they do seem less threatening. Although I have had people point out to me that you could try and strangle people with them. But they are allowed, so don't worry about it. If you are stopped in security and they say you can't take your knitting with you, if you have them on an interchangeable circular needle, you can just take the tips off and either just hand them over, or if you're organised enough to carry an stamped addressed envelope addressed to yourself, you could pop them in there and ask if you're allowed to go back out into the main terminal and see if you can find a post box, or ask the security officer if they would be kind enough to post it for you. I don't know, I've never been that organised. I've always thought if they ask me for my needles, I will just screw them off and hand them over. But I always have a spare pair of tips with me. So I always take at least one extra tips in all the sizes I think I'm going to need on holiday, and I put them somewhere safe. So I might just, if I'm carrying hold luggage, I might put them in the hold. If I'm not carrying hold luggage, I will put them somewhere else in my hand luggage away from my knitting project. I might even spread them in 2 or 3 different places. If you use things like Nipro, a lot of countries sell Nipro now. Sometimes they have other names. but you can find them in quite a lot of yarn shops around, definitely Europe. In the US they call them Knitter's Pride. So if you do get your knitting needle tips confiscated and you don't have spares, then you might be able to pick up some at your destination. Whatever you do, be polite, don't argue with security. If they decide your knitting needles aren't allowed to join you on holiday, then there's nothing you can do. Arguing with security will get you absolutely nowhere, and it will most likely end up with you spending your holiday at home. So don't do that. Like I said before, I've never had a problem knitting in departure lounge or by the gate. Another thing is consider what pattern you're going to take. If you're worried about losing your pattern or damaging it in some way, you might have water in your handbag which might leak onto it. You may spill something on it. It might be worth bringing a copy. So either take a photocopy of it before you leave and put that somewhere else in your luggage, or upload a PDF version of the pattern onto your phone, or if you have a smartphone, or onto your tablet or other device. I keep all my documents, including patterns, in Dropbox, and I have a Dropbox app on my phone and on my tablet, so I can access all my documents and my patterns wherever I am, which is quite useful. Also, do consider taking a notebook along. You may want to make some notes about where you want to see locally and other things, but it's also useful to have a notebook with your knitting. And just in case you make any modifications, or if there's something you have to remember, or you want to know where you are in the pattern and that kind of thing, it is a good idea to keep a notebook with your knitting. If you write it on loose bits of paper and post-it notes, you are likely to lose it. I quite often write notes on my phone, and but then I worry when I'm on holiday that I might get my phone stolen or lost. So maybe keep a notebook with you. That's a good idea. Think about how much knitting you're actually going to take. Do you really need 2 big lace weight shawls, 3 small shawls, and 4 pairs of socks if you're going away for a long weekend? Probably not. I've often taken way too much knitting with me. When we go to Spain, I know now that there is a local yarn shop near where we're staying. We normally stay on the southern Costa Blanca, near the town of Torrevieja, and there is a yarn shop in Torrevieja, which I discovered when we went there 2 years ago. But and if we go to Norway, there are several yarn shops near where my parents live. There are 2 in their local town, and other neighbouring towns have yarn shops as well. So I know if I go to Norway, I won't have a problem buying yarn. And in fact, last year when I went to Norway, I didn't take very much yarn with me. I went twice last year, and I stayed for 4 and 5 weeks each time. So I didn't take that much knitting with me, but I did buy some yarn when I was there, because I quite like buying yarn when I'm in Norway anyway. And I thought, rather than taking knitting with me and then buying yarn I have to bring back, I just bought yarn and knitted it while I was there. When we go to Spain, it's a little bit difficult because I only know 1 local yarn shop, so I tend to take a bit more knitting with me because I know I'm less likely to buy anything while I'm there. But do really consider how much you're really going to need. Be realistic. Yes, you might want to bring a spare project in case you have more knitting time than you expected, but do be realistic of how much knitting you're actually going to need and how much luggage space you have available. Especially if you're traveling light, you may have to choose between clothes or knitting. Also think about what knitting notions and spare needles you will need. So I have this little case. I think I got it from YarnAddict shop, but I can't quite remember. I'll see if I can find it and put the link below. It's a plastic case. It's got a big room here, and it's got 4 little rooms here. And I have some nylon cords which I use for afterthought heels for my socks. I got some small round stitch markers. I got some other various stitch markers. Then I got some padlock stitch markers there, and they're all separated so I can find them easily. And then in this big room I have things like small scissors, and these are small enough to go on a plane. I have needle gauge. I got some end stoppers for my interchangeable needles. I got sewing needles. I got things to tighten my interchangeable needles. I just got a variety of little things in there that I may need while I'm away. So I tend to, this is my main notions case, I tend to take that with me. And then I also have a case similar to this. So I got this from a shop on Etsy called The Sexy Knitter. I don't know whether she's still doing this, but if I can find it, I'll pop the link below. But they come, I don't think this is exactly what comes in them, because this is a few years old, but they come with things like a little snip. They come with a tape measure. They come with a little tiny crochet hook, double-ended crochet hook that you can use to fix mistakes. They come with a little stitch holder. They come with, I think, a couple of sewing needles. They come with cable needle, and then they also come with some stitch markers which aren't in here. So I've got a case like that, which I customized to what I need. So it's got a tape measure in it, and it's got all those other things in it. It doesn't have the cable needle because I don't use that very often. But it's got quite a few different stitch markers and other things that I use. And I keep one of these things in my handbag all the time. So if I take my knitting out and about with me and I need any of that, it's there. And I also take that on holiday with me. So when I go on holiday, I take that. Then I take one of these tins as well. And these tins, say for example, we're going to Spain, this would stay in my beach bag so that I had it when I'm knitting on the beach. So tell me, are you planning any trips this summer? We are planning a trip, hopefully. I'm not saying anything until that actually happens. But tell me if you're planning any trips this summer and where you're going to, or are you only planning any trips later in the year or next year? And do you have any travel tips to share, especially related to knitting? So if you have any travel tips, anything that you find useful when you go knitting, any specific type of projects that you like to take with you, special notions that you like to take with you, do share them in the comments below. I hope you liked this video. Do please give it a thumbs up if you did, and do consider subscribing if you haven't already. And thank you very much for watching.